I am Maggie Carter. I'm doing a demo lesson on 6th grade Engage New York, Unit 1, Lesson 1. My email is up here, maggiecarter@smsd.org. Feel free to email me with any questions you have. I did Engage New York all last year because I taught pre-algebra in 6th grade. And so I decided to just go with it, and I used it 100% of the time. It was a learning curve, but by May, I was very happy with it. I was happy with the level of problem solving and critical thinking skills my students had. I was happy with the way they thought about math. So just a quick little intro for you. I'm going into my 3rd year of teaching. I'm at Apache, and I'm excited to share this with you today. So I am moving through this in Notability. This is how I move through Engage New York lessons with my students. Unfortunately, 6th grade is a little bit, I don't know if I'd say a disadvantage, but we don't have a website where these PowerPoints are made for us. A lot of the other grade levels do, the elementary K through 5 grade levels do. But I have worked through a few of the units creating these that I would be happy to share with you, and then I'm working on getting these PowerPoints created as I go this year. So it's going to take some legwork, but I think that you'll find that this is the most effective way to present these lessons and this content to your students. So as we move through, any slide with a purple background is going to be a PD slide for you. It's not something that's included in the normal presentation slides that I give to my students. It's just some additional learning and knowledge that I think is beneficial as you're moving through this. And then slides with white are used for my students. So instructional time allotments. As you move through and prep, keep the pacing in mind. It's important to keep that timing in mind because the lessons are so rich with content, but you can also pick and choose things that you feel are going to be the most effective for your students' learning. So this model lesson is paced for math allotments that we're required to follow, 60 minutes of core instruction, and then 30 to 45 minutes of math workshop. So totaling about 90 total minutes. You will notice that I have time reminders set for myself on all the slides. They're a little different than what your manual will say. I kind of modify them based on what I think my students will need. Use these as a guide. I don't set a timer for myself or anything like that. I just use them as a guide to make sure I'm continuing to move through that lesson and not getting stuck on something for too long. So, Module 1, Topic A, Lesson 1 is ratios. I'm not going to read them to you because you can read them, but I put all of our learning targets at the beginning of my slides. And I get those learning targets from the student outcomes at the beginning of each lesson. So right under Lesson 1 ratios, it says student outcomes. That's where I pull these I can statements, and they relate directly to our math standards. So, and then that's going to happen probably pretty frequently. And then I share those with students before we get started, just to give them a little bit of a base of what we're going into content-wise for the day. So if you, on your slide, move down to the next purple slide as I get this back up, it talks about building routines with Engage New York. Take this first module as a time for you to really build those instructional routines with your students for Engage New York. Take the time during Module 1 to pre-teach them, model it, give them the expectations that you want them to have for future lessons, because you're going to be doing this collaborative conversation throughout math, this student conversation and talking. Okay, so I've totally lost internet connection. Give me just a second here. So that's important. Make sure you really build those through the beginning of this module so that they're set in stone for your students as you keep moving through the year. Another thing to keep in mind, if you look on the lesson notes of your student manual, which is on page 14, it talks about tape diagrams. These are new to a lot of us, including us as teachers. We haven't really used tape diagrams as a teaching method in the past. Students haven't used tape diagrams as a learning method in the past, yet they're used a lot and they're used frequently to model mathematics through EngageNY York. So just keep this in mind as you're working through it, that it's new. This may be the first time our students have even heard of a tape diagram. They probably don't have background knowledge on tape diagrams because we haven't been using EngageNY York, and that's okay. Just remember that our job as teachers is to model the use of those tape diagrams to our students and help them work through the learning curve that they're probably going to experience with this different way of modeling a math problem. So after we do the I can statements, I know we had some like PD slides mixed in, but then we would go to this example 1. We dive right into the learning of hitting those I can statements and targets that we have. So I would read this aloud. The co-ed soccer team has 4 times as many boys on it as it has girls. We say the ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls on the team is 4 to 1. We read this as 4 to 1. So then, with my students, I would create a table together with them on my iPad to show them how many boys and how many girls are on the team. And I have them do this on their iPad in their notes with me. Also, I have this manual right here with me because it is new and it is a different type of learning, so I follow along in my teacher's manual the whole time and make sure that I have that ready to go. So we would build, I would then build number of boys, and I would probably honestly color code it like I have in my main story. And then I'm also going to include a total column. So I would put then that we have 4 boys and we have 1 girl. And then if we have 4 boys to 1 girl on a soccer team, how many total players do we have? 5. And I would have them come to that conclusion, and I'd probably do like a 3, 2, 1 countdown. It's like, hey, when I count down from 3, tell me how many total soccer players we have. So I would do 5. And then I would kind of have them think about other ratios that show 4 times as many girls as boys. I would probably have them think, okay, if I have 5 people on a soccer team, okay, is that enough to fill a soccer field? Like, what is the typical number of soccer players on a soccer team? Well, I think it's more than 5, and many of our students are going to be able to tell us that. So having them think, okay, what are some other ratios that we could have? So then I would have the students turn and talk. So turn and talk real quick with somebody sitting next to you. What are some other ratios that you could fill in this table with? What are some other numbers that you could put into this table? Yep. Of course, technology issues.
It won't let me go to Notability.
Did you try?
I'll show you what it looks like. It literally looks like my Google login.
Oh yes. Okay. Did you click the other open button? Did you click this open up here?
Maybe not.
Try that. Maybe not.
It's fine.
Yeah. No, I just wasn't saying that.
Okay, let's come back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I know it's a little bit elementary, but that's how I kind of get my kiddos back on track and let them know that I'm ready to talk about this. So what were some other ways or other ratios that you use to show 4 times as many boys as girls, or a ratio of boys to girls of 4 to 1? What were some things? Feel free to just shout them out.
8 to 2.
8 to 2. So if I have 8 boys and 2 girls, how many total do I have? 10. And then I would say, well, what did you do to each of our first numbers? Well, what did you do, everyone? Multiply it by 2. Anything else? Ideas? Could I have 16 to 4 with a total of 20 players? Okay. Tell your neighbor why I could have 16 boys and 4 girls on my team with a total of 20 soccer players in all. Okay, good. I heard, even from up here, I heard great conversations because I can multiply 4 by 4 and get 16. I can multiply 1 by 4 and get 4. I add 16 and 4 together and I have 20 players. So I still have 4 times as many boys as I do girls. So now we'll move on. We're going to keep talking about this problem, but we're going to create a little bit of a different scenario. What if my ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls on the team is 3 to 2? What would my table look like? So then I would prompt them, and I'll prompt you, to go ahead and fill in this table again, but with our new numbers. So number of boys, number of girls, and the total. So everyone, how many boys do I have? 3. How many girls do I have? 2. How many total players do I have? 5. This is where I would then put you into groups again or have you team up with partners and have them complete this step 2. What are some other team combinations or ratios where there are 3 boys for every 2 girls? Okay, I'm not gonna make you pair up again because you guys just did that and you get the gist. But use some sort of cooperative learning strategy to have your students pair up and maybe give them a number. Say, find 2 other combinations. Find 3 other combinations. Whatever you are comfortable with, ask them to do that. So, real quick, what are some other combinations that we could have here? Somebody shout one out. 6 to 4 with 10 players total. 9 to 6 with 15 players total. Now here's where we kind of run into, not a problem, but some of your students might notice, well, I can't say this time that I have 4 times as many boys as girls because 3 is not divisible equally by 2. So that's where we can't say there are 3 times as many boys as girls. It's just not going to work because we have 2 girls instead of 1. So what would our multiplicative value be? Now I highlighted multiplicative value because it's going to be a new term for our students. It's a vocab term. The way I'm going to explain that to them is I'm going to say, think of the ratio 3 to 2. When we write it as a multiplicative value, we write it as a fraction. So we would have to turn that ratio into a fraction. So what would our multiplicative value of this ratio then be? There are 3 halves as many boys as girls. So that's where, even though we're still in example 1 and we're still talking about ratios, we've added a little bit more complexity to this one. It's not quite as simple as having just 4 boys and 1 girl and saying there's 4 times as many boys as there are girls. So as you move through problems like this, encourage student conversation. On page 16 of your teacher's manual, about 1/4 of the way down, it talks about how you can guide a student through conversation of this kind of a problem, where it maybe isn't as nice and neat as dividing 4 by 1, because you can't divide 3 by 2 that easily. So talking about math is hard. It's new to a lot of our students. So just remember that talking is a way that we can assess understanding. Okay, when I had you talk, I knew you understood how I could rewrite the ratio of 3 to 2 as 6 to 4. Because I could hear you, and it holds you accountable. I can go up to a student or to a few students and listen to them talk, and they have that accountability piece. They can't just sit there and maybe not grasp it. They're going to be getting it because we're going to be talking about it, and I'm going to be checking in with them. Utilize collaborative conversation strategies from Wonders and Kagan cooperative learning strategies. Those are great resources. And always, always, always be encouraging students to talk about their mathematical thinking and verbalize what is happening in their head, and only guide them when needed. They might struggle a little bit, that's okay. Let them struggle through that thought process. And then when they talk to you about it, then guide them if you need to help them get to that adequate thinking to be mathematically correct. So the next part I'd move into is I'd say to my students, can you visualize in your head 3 halves as many boys as girls? Is that easy for you? Thumbs up if it's easy for you, thumbs down if it's not. Show me, what do you think? Is that easy to visualize 3 halves as many boys as girls? Okay, so I see lots of different opinions. Some of you are like, I think maybe I can, I don't know, maybe not. Some of you are like, absolutely not, I can't. So this is where we are gonna make a tape diagram, and it's gonna help you visualize 3 halves as many boys as girls. So draw one in your notes as I draw it. And this is where I would introduce these tape diagrams to our 6th graders, to my 6th graders. Okay, and I'd start with ratios, order matters, so I'd start with the number of boys. So I would make a tape diagram for boys, and I know I have 3 boys. So I would draw a tape diagram, and I'm gonna split it into 3 pieces. You could draw like 1, 2, 3 if you wanted to. I just find it easier to draw the big thing and split it into 3. And then I know that for 3 boys, how many girls do I have? 2. When I draw my 2 girls, I want to make sure I match it up with my 2 that are already represented with my boys. So I would draw it exactly the same as the 2 for my boys, and I would split it in half to show that I have 1, 2, 3 boys for every 1, 2 girls. So now I want you to think in your head, which description here is making this easier for you to visualize? Saying the ratio 3 to 2, or saying there are 3 halves as many boys as girls? Turn and talk to your neighbor. Tell them which one is easier for you to visualize and why.
Children.
I was going to say that back up here when we talked about how it's written. Now,
Yes.
How come I can't move back
Because
up?
you need to touch the hand.
Okay. Up here, when it said we can write it this way, we write it. Up here, couldn't we have said we can write it this way? We can write it 4:1, or we could write it 4/1?
You could, but I think the overall goal is that we don't encourage that unless it's a funky situation like this.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And we have that multiplicative entity that ends up being a fraction.
Okay.
So, okay. So let's come back together. I'm gonna have some of you guys volunteer to just share your thinking real quick, or you could share your partner's thinking. Sharing out may not be, I utilize it here and there, but you could also have partners record their conversation on Seesaw for accountability's sake. You could have them do a quick little journal write maybe on Google Classroom or Socrative, some other app that collects something like a writing sample real quick, Google Forms. You could have them write down what they talked about with their partner. Some sort of accountability, because what these little stars represent is conversation. Well, I got around to a few groups, but if I have a student that is struggling and needs some additional assistance when I get to, a group here, I may not make it all the way around my room, which is fine, but what could you do to be accountable? Extend the time a little bit and move around and ask the students what they talked about with their partner, even if they're already done. So what do you think? Which one is easier for you to visualize? The 3 to 2 ratio that we drew, or saying that there's 3 halves as many boys as girls? Why is the ratio
Well, I was telling Megan that for me, I imagine 3 boys and 2 girls in a group rather than 3 halves of a person. It's kind of confusing.
Yep. You could even like pull students up and model that. Like pull up 3 boys and pull up 2 girls and say, here's my ratio. Now, how would I, can I split a person in half? No, it's not very easy to do that. So it's hard to visualize that 3 halves. Anybody else have any other good conversations or thoughts? All right. So now is when we are going to move on to kind of a new example, and this makes it a little bit more real world. It pulls it into our own classroom. So take a minute to just look around the room, and I want you to find the ratio of boys to girls in our class. Okay? When you know, just raise your hand. When you know, just raise your hand. When you know, raise your hand. Okay, so most hands I think are raised. I've got a couple people finishing up. That's fine. That's good. Okay, so when we say this together in just a minute, we're going to say it as a multiplicative comparison without using ratios. So how many, well, let's go in order. How many boys are there in our room? 5. How many girls are there in our room? 17. So that's just how we would say that. We would just talk about it real quick. There are 5 girls, there are 17 boys. Now, how could we say it as a ratio? 5 to 17. Okay, so we just kind of chorally respond to that. You all chorally respond when I asked you what's the difference between boys to girls. So now down here, can you write it as a ratio? Can you write a ratio of number of boys to number of girls? Well, you told me that there were 5 boys and 17 girls. Now I can write it with this colon in between, but does anybody else remember the other way that we've seen ratios written throughout this lesson? What else have we seen to use? The word 2. We could also do it as a fraction when we turn it into that multiplicative value. But here, let's just focus on 5 to 17. Okay? So I would probably have them write this down on their own and then compare it with the rest of their table. So you probably will have students who write it as 5 to 17 with a colon, and then you're going to have other students who write it as 5 to 17, and you're going to have other students who write it as a fraction, who write it 5 over 17. Then I'd have them talk. Does everybody at your table, does their ratio that they wrote down look the same? Why or why not? Is it okay that ratios aren't always written the same? So then it's another time for that collaborative conversation among students. It's getting them engaged in the conversation and talking. Any questions so far?
So how many of your kids will write 17 to 5?
I don't know. That's a good question. But my hope is that when they then collaborate with their table, the students are coming up with the problem with that order on their own. That I'm not having to then say, wait a minute, that order is not right. My hope is that somebody within that table would say, wait, aren't we supposed to do it number of boys to number of girls? Does that make sense? Yeah, so my goal would be that the students would come up with that problem and address it with their peers appropriately within that collaborative conversation. So now, this is just a note for my students, kind of like something that we, when we would have been in school, would have had to write down in our notebook. But I just put it up here for them. When working with ratios, it's okay to use either a colon or the word 2 between the 2 numbers of the ratio. And the ratio does not have units, meaning it doesn't have labels. When we're writing 5 to 17 up here, we aren't saying 5 boys to 17 girls. We're just looking at the numbers. It only has those numbers. So no descriptive words are attached when we're actually writing that ratio. So now I want you to look around the room again. Find the ratio of of girls to boys in the class. So when we look in this room, how many girls are there to boys? When you know, raise your hand, but don't talk yet. Okay. Write your ratio down and do it in 2 ways this time. So how could we write this ratio down? This is where I'm going to give students probably 30 seconds to write this down. Because I don't want to tell them the answer. I want them to come up with it on their own. So then at that point in time, after about 30 seconds has passed, and it'll seem like an eternity, but that's okay, I'm going to say, okay, everybody together, at the count of 3, be ready to tell me what ratio you wrote down for the number of girls to the number of boys. 1, 2, 3.
17 to 5.
17 to 5. Could I have written it differently? This is probably something I will do with my students. I will just write it this way, because that's where my brain goes to when I think ratios. It goes colon in between the 2 numbers. But my student right here, her brain might go to using the word 2. So I'm not going to write it in all 3 ways, or both ways right away, or there's actually 3 ways. I'm not going to do that right away. I'm going to wait and prompt my students to help me finish this out. So they would probably prompt me that I could also do it as 17 to 5 or 17 over 5. And then I have that star again. That star indicates that we're talking, students are talking. How is this ratio of the number of girls to the number of boys in our classroom the same as the ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls? How is it the same? And I also will probably challenge them to see how it's different. Comparing it. How does that compare? Okay, again, I'm not looking that they are writing an answer down right here. I will be listening for their conversations, or maybe having them record their conversations in Seesaw or on Google Classroom, or maybe a quick writing on a Post-it note, something that I can then see it if I feel like I can't get around my room to hear every single conversation happening. Okay, so they'll talk about that and I'll listen to that conversation. A good way to assess how we're doing. Okay, so making some more class ratios. I'm not going to go through this because honestly, you probably are getting the process here, but it reminds them that, or it reminds our students that order matters, and we're looking at in-class examples. It also gets them up and moving a little bit by just standing up, that standing and sitting, because we're kind of to a point in the lesson where we've been doing this for about 30 minutes. And so we are going to have some students who are getting pretty antsy at this point. So you would stand up if you went on vacation this summer. You would stay seated if you did not travel this summer. And then you would write a ratio for the number of students who did travel this summer to the number of students who did not travel this summer. So real quick, just raise your hand if you traveled this summer. And let's see. Okay. Is that everybody? 1, 2, 3, not you. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So I have 17 who traveled to 5 who did not. But it sounds familiar, and that's okay. My hope is that students are recognizing that, wait, there's the same number of people. So I don't necessarily then have to go and count the 5 people who didn't raise their hand. And then again, we're flipping it. Now write a ratio for the students who did not travel this summer to the number of students who did travel this summer. So again, we're looking at flipping it, understanding that that order matters. This time around, my order is going to be 5 to 17. And it gives, I think there's like a few more examples of these same types of problems. Okay, stand up if you have at least one sibling. Stay seated if you're an only child. These are all examples that I pulled right from the EngageNY 6th booklet. So, stand up if your favorite class is math. Stay seated if your favorite class is not math. So again, it's just practice, quick practice though, of writing those ratios. And it's okay that it's quick practice. We don't want them to get bored with this topic. We want them to stay engaged and get through this and make sure that they're understanding it in a good pace, a doable pace. So then I'm going to move into, you'll notice that this says exercise. The examples and exercises aren't distinguished very well in 6th grade EngageNY 6th. I take the examples as things I'm modeling and doing with my class. I then take the exercises as things that I can have them do with a partner or independently as additional practice, but where I step back and am just really at this point watching. So this would be something they would do independently on their own. Okay? They would look around the classroom to find quantities that they could compare. Okay? And then they would create a written ratio statement that represents your ratios. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. Go ahead and look around the classroom. See if you can find a quantity that is easily comparable, like 2 quantities that you can easily compare. So I'm going to start my timer. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Go ahead and do that now.
Okay, I have questions more about, okay, so this becomes their notebook.
Yes.
Do you ever have them have a notebook?
Do
they have a math journal?
They don't, but I've considered having one this year to have them do some writing about math, like during workshop, or pull it out at the end to reflect.
Okay.
So, but last year I did not. I just did
And it was
this.
just this.
Mhm.
Okay. And then, what are you doing with distributive practice and power drill and computation?
I'm doing it during workshop. So I'll touch base on that at the very
It'll
end.
be one of your.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It sure will.
5th and down is different than 6th.
Okay, take about 1 more minute to think about some quantities that could be compared within the classroom. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. It was a little less than a minute, but that's okay. So this is when I would ask students to share, or I would maybe ask one student to share or a couple students to share, and I would write down their examples because I want them to know that I value the work I just asked them to do. So that being said, did anybody come up with a good ratio from 2 quantities they can compare in this room? Yes? Ceiling tiles to lights. So I would write that down. My ratio compares. And I actually would encourage them, if they did not, I would encourage them to say, my own ratio compares number of ceiling tiles to number of lights. Because remember, we're trying to remind them that that's a number. And what did you find?
100 to 12.
So then they would write that ratio, and it reminds them that a ratio is just a number. So 100 to 12. If this were my classroom for this lesson, I would probably talk to the teacher that's right next to me and say, hey, sorry, but I'm going to open a couple of my blinds at the back of the room during my next lesson, because then they could compare the number of open blinds to the number of closed blinds. I could also just use this window if I wanted to. But I think that would be easier for students to see because it's all in one place along the back of the room. Okay. Then, after that 2 minutes of independent practice, I'm going to give them time to work with a partner. And they're going to practice using those descriptive words. So use words to describe a situation that could be represented by each ratio below. Be precise about the order in which the quantities are stated, because order matters, and be specific. For example, be sure to say the number of boys, not just boys. And then before I send them off, I'd probably have them practice reading these ratios with me all together. 1 to 12, 12 to 1, 2 to 5, 5 to 2, 10 to 2, 2 to 10. So I'm not going to give you 10 minutes. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. Just think of some descriptive quantities that you could describe with these ratios, and try to make sure that they're real life. Okay, try to make sure that in a pack of, a pack of Skittles, a small pack of Skittles, I might have 13 Skittles, but I probably wouldn't have 12 purple Skittles to 1 yellow Skittle. It would probably be a little bit more varied. So think about that too. You can push that thinking one step further. So then students would work with a partner or two on this. And I'd probably get them situated with their partners, make sure they're on task, and then I would for sure walk around the room and see what students are coming up with at this point in time. Okay, any questions? Okay, this is like the bulk of the lesson. This is when I would then move into this closing. These closing and aha moments are really important because, again, it gets our students talking. It gets them wrapping up their thoughts, concluding their thoughts in their own head about what we just learned. So real quick, I would have them help me fill in this little paragraph chunk of notes. A blank is an ordered pair of non-negative numbers which are not both 0. And I'd probably ask my students to raise their hand if they think what word goes in that blank. If you think you know what word goes in that blank in that first sentence, raise your hand. What word goes in there? Ratio. So a ratio is an ordered pair of non-negative numbers which are not both 0. So neither number is going to ever be 0 when we're looking at a ratio. The ratio is denoted, new vocab word that a 6th grader might not have seen before. So I would explain that denoted means that it's written A to B with that colon, or A to B with the word to. Remember, we don't really want to teach a ratio as a fraction unless we have to teach that multiplicative value, and then we want it to say A over B for the most part. And this, the way that it's written, is going to tell us the order of numbers. So in this specific case, the number A is first and the number B is second. And then this is where I would have them talk again with a partner, or maybe with me, or maybe we'd split into, groups of 3 or 4. Maybe I would have them just record their answers on Seesaw and send it to me. But these are those star points again. So we're talking. What did you learn today? What is a ratio? Can you verbally describe a ratio in your own words? How do we write ratios? What are 2 quantities that you would love to have in a ratio of 5 to 2, but hate to have in a ratio of 2 to 5? Seesaw would be a really good way to have them kind of record their verbal response to these questions, because then they can also write along with it if they want to. They can say, well, we write ratios with either a colon, and then they can show that colon, or the word to. If some students need to write to process as they're talking, Seesaw would be a good way to do it. They could also write on this and record as they write on this, or as they're talking to a partner, a peer. So that timing was pretty good. That took me about 42 minutes-ish. So that's my goal. Like, my shortest math lesson should be about 40, 45 minutes. The longest I would want this to be is 60, because it's a lot, even for our 6th graders. So now I would move into my rotations. And I did include a little bit in this how I do my math rotations with EngageNY. So what I do to set up my math rotations is, at this point in time, I would have my goal would be to have 40 minutes. I wouldn't always. Sometimes it will only be 25, which is fine. So I just split my rotations into 4, an M, an A, a T, and an H rotation, and divide whatever chunk of time I have by 4. So let's say for today that we have, let's go ahead and say we have 40 minutes. So I would divide it up, and I actually would do a 5-minute overview and then do about 8-minute rotations, because this is new. We're on lesson 1 of module 1. We're at the beginning of the year. This stuff is going to have to be taught. So for my M rotation, that's where I do my math facts, that computation practice, distributive review. You'll see here that I have them do distributive review week 1, Monday. Morning work is what I call it, but it's the distributive review from the district, but I have them choose 5. And then they upload it to Google Classroom when they're done so that I can check in on it. You could also use extra math. You could also use Flash to Pass if you have reflex. That's an option.
So I was our first year, was that the thing that had like the stars?
Yes, so like the 10 problems that the district created that has 10 problems for like a morning worker spiral review. Yes. I said that they could do this somewhere in the room with a voice level of 1 with 1 to 2 partners because I want them to be able to touch base with each other if they have questions, because the goal is that I'll be meeting with a group and I don't necessarily, I would help them, but if they can work together and use their partners and their classmates, why not? Is kind of my philosophy on that. So they're teaching each other. If we're teaching each other, that's the best way we're going to retain information. There are some days where I say you have to do that completely independently. I want to see what you know. I want to see what 5 you choose and how you solve them and how well you do. The at your seat rotation is where I do the exit ticket for the lesson. So I pull every single lesson ticket for every single lesson, and that's my formative assessment to see how my students are doing after I've taught the lesson. You can print them. That's what I did last year. I printed them just because my students preferred to work on paper. This year I'm going to try Go Formative. And I have a link to Go Formative on the next slide for you. But Go Formative, all of the exit tickets are already uploaded for us on Go Formative, so it's really easy to pull and open up to the class to you put the link in Google Classroom and that's how they access it. Is that how you did it, Michael, last year? Yeah.
Deb Schlieben just said though that they're in the process right now of migrating a bunch of stuff. So
Okay.
it may not work for the next short period of time. But
That makes sense, but you can always print those too. I printed them last year just because it worked better for my students. And this is one of those things where I will have them do it on their own completely because I want to see what they know. I want to see where each and every individual student is at. Then the T is teacher's choice. I have them come to my table and bring a pencil, and this is where if you want to have a math notebook, have them bring that math notebook, and this is where you could just provide problems to them that they review in a math notebook. You could also have them just bring their iPad and use a new page in Notability for notes for that. Or you could use whiteboards, or you could play a game. There's just whatever you would normally do for enriching and extending or providing intervention at your small group table at that time, that's what I'm gonna do here. And I'm gonna incorporate ratios in what we just learned in some sort of way. Then finally, the H is either hands-on. Last year I called it homework. This year I changed it to hands-on or happy work on the iPads. It's kind of lame, but I was trying to make it work with the H. So this is where this year I'm gonna have students go to zern.org. It's a really cool interactive website that reinforces the EngageNY skills that we're teaching. The problem is it's not aligned with 6th grade, it's K through 5, but I was looking through and there's a lot of things that would provide good review for our students of concepts that were tough in 5th grade, such as like fractions and looking at adding and subtracting fractions and things that will help them as we move through skills in 6th grade. So it's a good place for them to review. It also provides computation review. There's number sprints in there where they have to go through and practice that computation of multiplication and division. There's some addition in there too. It kind of sporadically throws it in, but just gets them those previous skills. What I linked here as like an example of what I would do was a lesson on equivalent fractions. And you know, equivalent fractions are a little bit different, but there's a comparison there between understanding that equivalent fractions and equivalent ratios are in some ways very similar. So it would reinforce that skill of understanding that we can write the ratio 3 to 2 as 6 to 4. And then I'm done. Now what? I use Khan Academy and just link on my Google Classroom a spot for the current EngageNY lesson that we've done where they can rewatch the video, do some practice of those skills. That's all available on Khan Academy. There's an EngageNY section for each grade level. So that's how I do my math rotations, and then they move through them. If you're teaching Integrated Math 6 this year at all, I would swap the H activity, the zern.org, with the Khan Academy activity. I would put Khan Academy in my H rotation and have the Zern be like an extra I'm done now, what should I do activity. The reason being is because I believe Khan Academy pushes them a little bit farther and extends it just a little bit more. It's not so much a review and reinforcing of skills from a previous year, it's reviewing and reinforcing what was just taught, and it may take them a little bit beyond, depending on where the students get for the day. And then last but not least, I would have my students come back together, and this is new this year, this is something new that I'm going to try, but I'm going to have them reflect. So after we've done our rotations, I'm going to have them come back together. I got these level of understanding posters that I'm going to utilize this year, and I'm going to have them look at the I can statements from the very beginning of the lesson and rate where they feel they are at. So 0 is even with help, I still don't understand. 1, I am starting to get it, but I am still confused. 2, I can do this with help or an example in front of me. 3, I can do this on my own. I can show I understand. And 4 is I'm very confident with this, I can teach someone else. So I'm going to have them use that to go through those I can statements from the very beginning of the lesson. Okay, so, and then I also provided another spot for any additional notes that they maybe want to tell me. And then my plan is to have them screenshot this when they're done, when they've written that down on their iPad, and upload it to Google Classroom. And then I can just quickly go in and see how we're doing and how my students are feeling about the content I just taught them, the content that they just worked through. So that's kind of the plan there. Here you'll also see I have some other math resources for you to check out. I would definitely check out the following: Zern, Khan Academy, Illustrative Mathematics, Go Formative, and Prodigy. Those are things that you can utilize in your rotations, your workshop rotations. And then I also gave you some additional ideas for the 3 rotations where students are doing some independent practice. So,
where are you using the exit ticket?
oops. I am using, so the exit ticket I have them do during one of their rotations, the at their seat rotation.
Oh, that's right.
Yep, and you know, I struggled last year with, well, what if we only have 5 to 8 minutes of rotations and they can't get the exit ticket done? That's okay. I want to see what they can get done in that amount of time, because that's going to give me some indication of where they're at in the overall understanding and development of the concept. So, and that's something that I'll pre-teach. Like when you get to that at your seat rotation, you know, get started right away so that you're showing me what you know. That's your chance to prove to me that you've got this, that you could teach somebody else, if that's really where you're at with the concept development. So that's where that exit ticket is. You could also save the exit ticket. You could, for at your seat, you could swap the exit ticket with the reflection. If you would rather pull them all back together as a whole group in the last, say, 7 to 10 minutes of your lesson, and you have that time to do the exit ticket, swap that, do that at the very end, and then at your at your seat rotation, have them do some reflecting. They're still doing adequate work at that rotation. They're writing about math. So that's another option. If you would feel more comfortable having everybody back at their seat, quietly working on that exit ticket instead of in a rotation. Yes.
Do you have them do homework?
I don't.
Okay. So you just base it off of their.
I base it completely off of their exit ticket. Sometimes with EngageNY, they're it's so content rich in the moment, and I really develop formative assessments throughout my whole lesson that I don't feel like it would be effective to then send it home. So yeah, I mean, I encourage them to think about math in different ways by cooking maybe with their family, or preparing a meal, or baking something with their family, so that they're getting some of that math learning in there, or looking at flashcards, or playing Prodigy at night.
Yeah.
But I don't send anything home, homework-wise.
So would you base your assessments, like test days or whatever, off of exit tickets that you guys have gone through?
Yes, so I pretty much I've pulled exit tickets as daily. Last year I did exit tickets for a daily grade. And in pre-algebra, I had them finish the exit ticket for homework if they didn't get it done. That's always an option if you want to send homework home. If they don't get the exit ticket done, send that home and say that's what's due tomorrow. But that was what I would pull for my daily, almost a daily grade. And then I would do the mid-module assessment when it was time, when it came time in the booklet, and then the end of module assessment.
Okay.
So,
That makes sense.
Do you
yes.
not use the problem set?
I typically would pull problems from the problem set for my teacher's table. So yes, I should have mentioned that, sorry. That's where I typically pull that, is from the teacher's set.
And at the beginning of the year, since you obviously don't know the kids as well as you're going to in the future, do you just have them randomly grouped and then eventually you'll swap kids?
That's a good question. I will probably group my kids this year based on initial DIBELS data. And maybe MAP scores once we have them. But yeah, probably initially watch for those kiddos who are really struggling and pull them before you have that data. But then yeah, it's almost a constant analysis of looking at how are they doing, pulling exit once you have those exit tickets, look at the ones who get below a 75% because they're not at proficiency. And so pull those kiddos, and those are probably your first two groups to meet with and touch base with on the concept. Anything else? Any other questions? I hope I didn't completely overload you. So that's all I have for you. If you have more questions, please let me know. I timed that out pretty well. I'm done early. I was worried I was gonna go way over. So I did also, for you guys, I know this is only a help right away, but I put a student version here that you can pull and use day one. So I know it's just one lesson right now. I'm still working on the days 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is a good one that you can pull and open up and give to your students on day one, and it's done for you. So please utilize that. Please email me if you have any questions. I'm also happy to share stuff that I make, like PowerPoints and stuff, when I have them made. I just am not going to have them made right away right now because I'm doing them as I go. I didn't start with PowerPoints like this until mid-year last year when I was doing EngageNY. So
What did you do?
I used the student booklets last year for modules 1, 2, and 3, and I just didn't give enough workspace. It was hard for the kids to find where I was at and follow along with me because the student booklet looks different than the teacher's booklet and the pages are numbered weird. And so I just finally was like, you know what, I'm gonna try this. And that I have, and I really like it. I really think that it's the easiest way to tackle giving notes to our students right now for what the EngageNY stuff that we have. I mean, we have the iPads available to us, so I feel like it's a really good use of that resource. It's just substitution, but it still is utilizing that instead of the booklets. And so,
Do you think you're going to have your new iPads on day one?
I don't know, probably not, but I don't know. Yeah, it'll be by.
And you could show this on the screen and have them do it in a math journal.
You could, yeah. Yeah.
Or print off
Or
the student notebook.
yeah, print off
For the first
or I might have this ready to go and print copies of this off 6 slides on a page or something you know what I mean, where I'm not using a ton of paper, but yeah. Yes.
Just an idea I was going to share out. So I'm co-workers with Maggie.
Yes.
So what Maggie and I did just to help alleviate some of the work of these PowerPoints is we would just your lesson 1, I'm lesson 2, and then our other co-worker was lesson 3. So we would rotate who was making the PowerPoints.
And that made it much more doable because she wasn't where I was at when I did unit 4 or module 4, sorry, I've got to get with that lingo. And so I did them all and I survived, but it was a lot. And so when we did module 5 and 6 together, it was it was very, and it was very fluid. Like, we did it, we knew what we were gonna do, we mapped it out, we did it at our own pace. Never were we like, hey, you haven't done that module yet, so. Yeah.
And for those people that didn't sit in the assessment class, Deb Schlitten was going to, our district did spend some time, some people did spend some time last year, when it was kind of in the spring, creating some mid-module and end-of-module assessments to use that kind of mirror the questions that are in the ones that were provided by
Yes.
Engage New York, but they're worded differently. There's maybe not as many of them in the assessment as in the assessments that were provided by Engage New York. And there's also some that are grouped together because sometimes these modules can take 4 or 5 weeks. And that's a huge chunk of time out of your quarter when you're looking at giving them grades and stuff like that. So we tried to give assessments, or give an assessment opportunity at least about every third week at the most. So you at least have something that you can put in a grade book.
Those kind of end of topic, because it goes topic A, B, C, D for the most part. So yeah, trying to get some little dip of an assessment.
Analyzed and posted, I'm sure, before everybody needs them.
Yes.
She said something they've learned is the mid-module assessment and module assessment, they're so long because they're supposed to be seen as a bank of questions from institutions.
Not to do all of them.
Well, and I think they're making some for us.
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
So they're making some
So,
topic.
yes, and they're different than the ones that are on the Engage website or in your book. So therefore, you could use the ones on the Engage website and in your book as review for your students to send home as practice if you wanted to, or to do with them in class as practice. But yes, we are working on an additional assessment that has different wording problems, things like that that aren't accessible online. So they'll be the districts. Okay, any other questions? Anything else I can do for you before I let you go from our first day back? Okay, well, thank you so much. Please you're welcome. Don't hesitate to email me if you have questions, and have a good year. Have a great year.